Part 4, Chapter 14. Women, I had been told, were not to concern themselves with any aspect of the Apina ritual. They were not supposed to prepare it, nor were they allowed to take the hallucinogenic snuff. It was not even proper for a woman to touch the cane tube through which the powder was blown, unless a man specifically asked her to fetch it for him. To my utter astonishment, one morning, I saw Rotimi bent over the hearth, attentively studying the dark reddish apina seeds, drying over the embers. Without acknowledging my presence, she proceeded to rub the dried seeds between her palms over a large leaf containing a heap of bark ashes. With the same confidence and expertise I had seen in Itua, she periodically spat on the ashes and seeds as she kneaded them into a pliable uniform mass. As she transferred the doughy mixture onto a hot earthenware shard, Rotimi looked up at me, her smile clearly revealing how delighted she was by my bafflement. "Oh, the apina will be strong," she said, shifting her gaze back to the hallucinogenic dough bursting with loud popping sounds on the piece of terracotta. With a smooth stone, she ground the fast-drying mass until it all blended into a very fine powder, which included a layer of dust from the earthenware shard. "I didn't know women knew how to prepare apina," I said. "Women can do anything," Rotimi said, funneling the brownish powder into a slender bamboo container. Waiting in vain for her to satisfy my curiosity, I finally asked, "Why are you preparing the snuff?" "Itua knows I prepare apina well," she said proudly. "He likes to have some ready whenever he returns from a hunt." For several days we had eaten nothing but fish. Not being in the mood for hunting, Itua, together with a group of men, had dammed a small stream in which they placed crushed, cut-up pieces of Iori toto vine. The water had turned a whitish color, as if it were milk. All the women had to do was to fill their baskets with the asphyxiated fish that rose to the surface. But the Itikoteri were not too fond of fish, and soon the women and children began to complain about the lack of meat. 2 days had passed since Itua and his friends had set out for the forest. "How do you know Itua is returning today?" I asked. And before Rotimi answered, hastily added, "I know, you can feel it in your legs." Smiling, Rotimi picked up the long, narrow tube and blew through it repeatedly. "I'm cleaning it," she said with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Have you ever taken apina?" Rotimi leaned closer to whisper in my ear. "Yes, but I did not like it. It gave me a headache." She looked around furtively. "Would you like to try some?" "I don't want a headache." "Maybe it's different for you," she said. Standing up, she casually put the bamboo container and the 3-foot-long cane into her basket. "Let's go to the river. I want to see if I mix the apina well." We walked along the bank, quite a distance from where the Itikoteri usually came to bathe or to draw water. I squatted on the ground in front of Rotimi, who meticulously began introducing a small amount of apina into one end of the cane. Delicately, she flicked the tube with her forefinger, scattering the powder along its length. I felt drops of sweat running down my sides. The only time I had ever been drugged was when I had had 3 wisdom teeth removed. At the time, I had wondered if it would not have been wiser to bear the pain instead of the gruesome hallucinations the drug had induced in me. "Lift your head slightly," Rotimi said, holding the slender tube toward me. See the little Rasha nut at the end? Press it against your nostril. I nodded. I could see that the palm seed had been tightly attached to the end of the cane with the resin. I made sure the small hole that had been drilled into the hollowed out fruit was inside my nose. I ran my hand along the fragile length of the smooth cane. I heard the sharp sound of compressed air shooting through the tube. I let go of it as a piercing pain seared into my brain. That feels terrible, I groaned, pounding the top of my head with my palms. Now the other one, laughed Ritimi as she placed the cane against my left nostril. I felt as if I were bleeding, but Ritimi assured me it was only mucus and saliva dribbling uncontrollably from my nose and mouth. I tried to wipe myself clean, but was unable to lift my heavy hand. Why don't you enjoy it instead of being so fussy about a little slime running into your belly button? Ritimi said, grinning at my clumsy efforts. I'll wash you later in the river. There's nothing to enjoy, I said, beginning to sweat profusely from every pore. I felt nauseous, and there was an odd heaviness in my limbs. I saw points of red and yellow light everywhere. I wondered what Ritimi found so funny. Her laughter reverberated in my ears, as if it came from inside my head. Let me blow some in your nose, I suggested. Oh no, I have to watch over you, she said. We cannot both end up with a headache. This apina has to give more than a headache, I said. Blow some more into my nose. I want to see a hikura. Hikuras don't come to women, Ritimi said between fits of laughter. She placed the cane against my nose. But perhaps if you chant, they'll come to you. I felt each grain travel up my nasal passage, exploding in the top of my skull. Slowly, a delicious lassitude spread through my body. I turned my gaze to the river, almost expecting a mythical creature to emerge from its depths. Ripples of water began to grow into waves, splashing back and forth, with such force that I scurried backward on my hands and knees. I was certain the water was trying to trap me. Shifting my eyes to Ritimi's face, I was bewildered by her alarmed expression. What is it? I asked. My voice trailed off as I followed the direction of her gaze. Itua and Iramamoe stood in front of us. With great difficulty, I stood up. I touched them to make sure I was not hallucinating. Unfastening the large bundles slung over their backs, they handed them to the other hunters standing behind on the trail. Take the meat to the Shabono, Iramamoe said hoarsely. The thought that Itua and Iramamoe would eat so little of the meat filled me with such sadness I began to cry. A hunter gives away most of the game he kills. He would rather go hungry than risk the chance of being accused of stinginess. I'll save you my portion, I said to Itua. I prefer fish to meat. Why are you taking a pina? Itua's voice was stern, but his eyes were sparkling with amusement. We had to check if Ritimi mixed the powder properly, I mumbled. It's not strong enough. Haven't seen a hikura yet. It's strong, Itua retorted, putting his hands on my shoulders. He made me squat on the ground in front of him. A pina made from seeds is stronger than the kind made from the bark. He filled the cane with a snuff. Ritimi's breath does not have much strength. A devilish grin creased his face as he placed the tube against my nostril and blew. I fell backward, cradling my head, which reverberated with Iramamoe's and Itua's uproarious laughter. Slowly I stood up. My feet felt as though they were not touching the ground. "Dance, white girl," Iramamoe urged me. "See if you can lure the Hakuras with your chant." Mesmerized by his words, I held out my arms and began to dance with small jerky steps, the way I had seen the men dance when in an Ipina trance. Through my head ran the melody and words of one of Iramamoe's Hakura songs. After days of calling the Hakura of the hummingbird, she finally came to me. Dazzled, I watched her dance. I fainted on the ground and did not feel as she pierced my throat and tore out my tongue. I did not see how my blood flowed into the river, tinting the water red. She filled the gap with precious feathers. That is why I know the Hakura songs. That is why I sing so well. Itua guided me to the edge of the river, then splashed water on my face and chest. "Don't repeat his song," he warned me. "Iramamoe will get angry. He will harm you with his magic plants." I wanted to do as he told me, yet I was compelled to repeat Iramamoe's Hakura song. "Don't repeat his song," Itua pleaded. "Iramamoe will make you deaf. He will make your eyes bleed." Itua turned toward Iramamoe. "Do not bewitch the white girl." "I won't," Iramamoe assured him. "I'm not angry at her. I know she is still ignorant of our ways." Framing my face with his hands, he forced me to look into his eyes. I can see the Hakuras dancing in her pupils. In the light of the sun, Iramamoe's eyes were not dark, but light, the color of honey. "I can also see the Hakuras in your eyes," I said to him, studying the yellow specks on his iris. His face radiated a gentleness that I had never seen before. As I tried to tell him that I finally understood why his name was Jaguar's Eye, I collapsed against him. I was vaguely aware of being carried in someone's arms. As soon as I was in my hammock, I fell into a deep sleep from which I did not awaken until the following day. Arasue, Iramamoe, and old Kamosiwe had gathered in Itua's hut. Anxiously, I looked from one to the other. They were painted with onoto. Their perforated earlobes were decorated with short, feathered, ornamented pieces of cane. When Ritimi sat next to me in my hammock, I was certain she had come to protect me from their wrath. Before giving any of the men a chance to speak, I began weaving excuses for having taken a pina. The faster I talked, the safer I felt. A steady flow of words, I thought, was the surest way of dispelling their anger. Arasue finally cut into my incoherent chatter. "You talk too fast. I can't understand what you are saying." I was disconcerted at the friendliness of his tone. I was certain it was not a result of my talking. I glanced at the others. Except for a vague curiosity, their faces revealed nothing. I leaned against Ritimi and whispered, "If they aren't upset, why are they all in the hut?" "I don't know," she said softly. "White girl, have you ever seen a Hakura before yesterday?" Arasue asked. "I've never seen a Hakura in my life," I rapidly assured him. Not even yesterday. Iramamoe saw Hikuras in your eyes, Arawasue insisted. He took a pina last night. His personal Hikura told him she had taught you her song. I know Iramamoe's song because I've heard it so often. I almost shouted. How could his Hikuras have taught me? Spirits don't come to women. You don't look like an Itikoteri woman, old Kamasiwe said, gazing at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. The Hikuras could easily be confused. He wiped the tobacco juice dribbling down the side of his mouth. There have been times when Hikuras have come to women. Believe me, I said to Iramamoe, the reason I know your song is because I've heard you sing it so many times. But I sing very softly, Iramamoe argued. If you really know my song, why don't you sing it now? Hoping this would bring the Apina incident to an end, I began to hum the melody. To my utter distress, I could not remember the words. You see, Iramamoe explained triumphantly, my Hikura taught you my song. That's why I didn't get angry at you yesterday, why I didn't blow into your eyes and ears, why I didn't hit you with a burning log. It must be so, I said, forcing a smile. Inwardly, I shuddered. Iramamoe was well known for his quick temper, revengeful nature, and cruel punishments. Old Kamosiwe spat his tobacco wad on the ground, then reached for a banana hanging directly above him. Peeling it, he stuffed the fruit whole in his mouth. A long time ago there was a woman Shapori, he mumbled, still chewing. Her name was Imawami. Her skin was as white as yours. She was tall and very strong. When she took a pina, she sang to the Hikuras. She knew how to massage away pain and how to suck out sickness. There was no one like her to hunt for the lost souls of children and to counteract the curses of enemy shamans. Tell us, white girl, Arawasue said. Have you known a Shapuri before you came here? Have you ever been taught by one? I've known shamans, I said, but they have never taught me anything. In great detail, I described the kind of work I had been engaged in prior to my arrival at the mission. I talked about Doña Mercedes and how she had permitted me to watch and record the interaction between herself and her patients. Once Doña Mercedes let me take part in a spiritual seance, I said. She believed that I might be a medium. Curers from various areas had gathered at her house. We all sat in a circle chanting for the spirits to come. We chanted for a very long time. Did you take a pina? Iramamoe asked. No, we smoked big fat cigars, I said, and almost giggled at the memory. There had been 10 people in Doña Mercedes' room. Rigidly, we all sat on stools covered with goat skin. With obsessive concentration, we had puffed at our cigars, filling the room with smoke so thick we could hardly see each other. I was too busy getting sick to be transported into a trance. One of the curers asked me to leave, saying that the spirits would not come as long as I stayed in the room. Did the Hikuras come after you left? Iramamoe asked. Yes, I said. Doña Mercedes told me the following day how the spirits entered into the head of each curer. Strange, Iramamoe murmured. But you must have learned many things if you lived at her house. I learned her prayers and incantations to the spirits, and also the types of plants and roots she used for her patients, I said. But I was never taught how to communicate with spirits or how to cure people. I looked at each of the men. Itua was the only one who smiled. According to her, the only way to learn about curing was to do it. Did you start curing? Old Kamosiwe asked. No, Doña Mercedes suggested I should go to the jungle. The four men looked at one another, then slowly turned to me and almost in a chorus asked, Did you come here to learn about shamans? No, I shouted. Then, in a subdued tone, added, I came to bring Angelica's ashes. Choosing my words very carefully, I explained how it was my profession to study people, including shamans, not because I wanted to become one, but because I was interested in learning about the similarities and differences between various shamanistic traditions. Have you been with other Shapori besides Doña Mercedes? Old Kamosiwe asked. I told the men about Juan Caridad, an old man I had met years before. I got up and reached for my knapsack, which I kept inside a basket tied to one of the rafters. From the zipped side pocket, which because of the odd lock had escaped the woman's curiosity, I pulled out a small leather pouch. I emptied its contents into Arasue's hands. Suspiciously, he gazed at a stone, a pearl, and the uncut diamond I had been given by Mr. Barth. This stone, I said, taking it from Arasue's hand, was given to me by Juan Caridad. He made it jump out of the water before my eyes. I caressed the smooth, deep, golden-colored stone. It fitted perfectly in my palm. It was oval-shaped, flat on one side, a round bulge on the other. Did you stay with him the way you did with Doña Mercedes? Arasue asked. No, I didn't stay with him for very long, I said. I was afraid of him. Afraid? I thought you were never afraid, old Kawasume exclaimed. Juan Caridad was an awesome man, I said. He made me have strange dreams in which he would always appear. In the mornings, he would give me a detailed account of what I had dreamt. The men nodded knowingly at each other. What a powerful Shapori, Kamosiwe said. What did he make you dream about? I told them that the dream that had frightened me the most had been, up to a point, an exact sequential replica of an event that had taken place when I was 5 years old. Once, while I was returning from the beach with my family, my father decided, instead of driving directly home, to take a detour through the forest to look for orchids. We stopped by a shallow river. My brothers went with my father into the bush. My mother, afraid of snakes and mosquitoes, remained in the car. My sister dared me to wade with her along the shallow river bank. She was 10 years older than I, tall and thin, with short curly hair so bleached by the sun it appeared white. Her eyes were a deep velvety brown, not blue or green like most blondes. As she squatted in the middle of the stream, she told me to watch the water between her feet, which to my utter bewilderment turned red with blood. Are you hurt? I asked. She did not say a word as she stood up. Smiling, she beckoned me to follow her. I remained in the water, petrified, as I watched her climb up the opposite bank. In my dream, I experienced the same fear, but I told myself that now that I was an adult, there was nothing to be afraid of. I was about to follow my sister up the steep bank when I heard Juan Caridad's voice urging me to remain in the water. "She is calling you from the land of the dead," he said. "Don't you remember that she is dead?" No matter how much I begged him, Juan Caridad absolutely refused to discuss how he succeeded in appearing in my dreams, or how he knew that my sister had died in a plane crash. I had never talked to him about my family. He knew nothing about me except that I had come from Los Angeles to learn about curing practices. Juan Caridad did not get angry when I suggested that he probably was familiar with someone who knew me well. He assured me that no matter what I said or what I accused him of, he would not discuss the subject he had sworn to remain silent about. He also urged me to return home. "Why did he give you the stone?" old Kamosiwe asked. "Can you see these dark spots and the transparent veins crisscrossing the surface?" I said, holding the stone close to his one eye. Juan Caridad told me that they represent the trees and the rivers of the forest. He said the stone revealed that I would spend a long time in the jungle, that I should keep it as a talisman to protect me from harm. The four men in the hut were silent for a long time. Arasue handed me the uncut diamond and the pearl. "Tell us about these." I talked about the diamond Mr. Barth had given me at the mission. "And this?" old Kamosue asked, picking up the small pearl from my hand. "I've never seen such a round stone." "I've had it for a long time," I said. "Longer than the stone Juan Caridad gave you?" Ritimi asked. "Much longer," I said. "The pearl was also given to me by an old man when I arrived at Margarita Island, where I had gone with some classmates for a holiday. As we disembarked from the boat, an old fisherman came directly toward me. Placing the pearl in my hand, he said, 'It was yours from the day you were born. You lost it, but I found it for you at the bottom of the sea.'" "What happened then?" Arasue asked impatiently. "Nothing much," I said. "Before I recovered from my surprise, the old man was gone." Kamosue held the pearl in his hand, letting it roll back and forth. It looked strangely beautiful in his dark, calloused palm, as if it belonged there. "I would like you to have it," I said to him. Smiling, Kamosue looked at me. "I like it very much." He held the pearl against the sunlight. "How beautiful it is. There are clouds inside the stone." "Did the old man who gave it to you look like me?" he asked, as all four men were walking out of the hut. "He was old like you," I said as he turned toward his hut. But the old man had not heard me. Holding the pearl high above his head, he pranced around the clearing. No one said a word about my having taken a pina. On some evenings, however, when the men gathered outside their huts to inhale the hallucinogenic powder, some youths would jokingly cry out, "White girl, we want to see you dance. We want to hear you sing Iramamoe's Hikura song." But I did not try the powder again. Chapter 15. I never found out where Puriwariwe, Angelica's brother, lived. I wondered if someone actually called him when he was needed, or if he intuited it. Whether he would stay in the Shabono for days or weeks, no one knew. There was something reassuring about his presence, about the way he chanted to the hikuras at night, urging the spirits to protect his people, especially the children, who were the most vulnerable of all, from the spells of an evil Shapori. One morning, the old Shapori walked directly into Etua's hut. Sitting in one of the empty hammocks, he demanded I show him the treasures I kept hidden in my knapsack. I was tempted to retort that I kept nothing hidden, but remained silent as I unfastened my basket from the rafter. I knew he was going to ask me for one of the stones, and fervently wished it would not be the one Juan Caridad had given me. Somehow, I was certain it was the stone that had brought me to the jungle. I feared that if Puriwariwe were to take it from me, Milagros would arrive and take me back to the mission. Or worse, something dreadful might happen to me. I believed implicitly in the stone's protective powers. Intently, the old man studied both the diamond and the stone. He held the diamond against the light. "I want this one," he said, smiling. "It holds the color of the sky." Stretching in the hammock, the old man placed the diamond and the other stone on his stomach. "Now, I want you to tell me about the Shapori, Juan Caridad. I want to hear all of the dreams in which this man appeared. I don't know if I can remember them all." Glancing at his thin, wrinkled face and emaciated body, I had the vague feeling I had known him longer than I could remember. There was a familiar, tender response in me as his smiling eyes held my gaze. Lying comfortably in my hammock, I began to speak with an easy fluency. Whenever I did not know the Itikoteri word, I filled in with a Spanish one. Puriwariwe did not seem to mind. I had the impression he was more interested in the sound and rhythm of my words than in their actual meaning. When I finished with my narration, the old man spat out the wad of tobacco Ritimi had prepared for him prior to leaving for work in the gardens. In a soft voice, he spoke of the woman shaman Kamasiwe had already told me about. Not only was Imawami considered a great Shapori, but she was also believed to have been a superb hunter and warrior who had raided enemy settlements together with the men. "Did she have a gun?" I asked, hoping to learn more about her identity. Since I first heard about her, I had been obsessed with the possibility that she might have been a captive white woman. Maybe as far back as the time when the Spaniards first came looking for El Dorado. She used a bow and arrows, the old shaman said. Her mamukori poison was one of the best kind. No matter how I phrased my question, I was unable to learn whether Imawami was a real person or a being that belonged to a mythological epoch. All the Shapori was willing to say was that Imawami existed a long time ago. I was certain the old man was not being evasive. It was common for the Itikoteri to be vague about past events. On some evenings, after the woman had cooked the last meal, Puriwariwe would sit by the fire in the middle of the clearing. Both young and old gathered around him. I always looked for a spot close to him, for I did not want to miss a word of what he said. In a low, monotonous, nasal tone, he talked about the origins of man, of fire, of floods, of the moon and the sun. Some of these myths I already knew, yet each time they were recounted, it was as if I were listening to a different story. Each narrator embellished, improved upon it according to his own vision. Which one is the real myth of creation? I asked Puriwariwe. One evening after he finished the story of Waipilishoni, a woman shaman who had created blood by mixing onoto and water. She had given life to the wood-like bodies of a brother and sister by making them drink this substance. The evening before, the Shapori had told us that the first Indian was born out of the leg of a man-like creature. For an instant, Puriwariwe regarded me with a perplexed expression. "They are all real," he finally said. "Don't you know that man was created many times throughout the ages?" I shook my head in amazement. He touched my face and laughed. "Oh, how ignorant you still are. Listen carefully. I will tell you of all the times the world was destroyed by fires and floods. A few days later, Puriwariwe announced that Shoroi, Iramamoe's oldest son, was to be initiated as a Shapori. Shoroi was perhaps 17 or 18 years old. He had a slight, agile body and a narrow, delicately featured face in which his deep brown eyes seemed overly large and glowing. Taking only a hammock, he moved into the small hut that had been built for him in the clearing. Since it was believed that Hikuras fled from women, no females were allowed near the dwelling, not even Shoroi's mother, grandmother, or his sisters. A youth who had never been with a woman was chosen to take care of the initiate. It was he who blew Ipina into Shoroi's nostrils, who saw that the fire was never out, and made sure each day that Shoroi had the proper amount of water and honey, the only food the initiate was allowed. The women always left enough wood outside the Shabono, so the boy did not have to search too far. The men were responsible for finding honey. Each day the Shapori urged them to go farther into the forest for new sources. Shoroi spent most of the time inside the hut, lying in his hammock. Sometimes he sat on a polished tree trunk Iramamoe had placed outside the dwelling, for he was not supposed to sit on the ground. Within a week, Shoroi's face had darkened from the Ipina. His once glowing eyes were dull and unfocused. His body, dirty and emaciated, moved with the clumsiness of a drunkard. Life went on as usual in the Shabono, except for the families living closest to Shoroi's hut, who were not allowed to cook meat on their hearths. According to Puriwariwe, Ikuras detested the smell of roasting meat, and if they so much as caught a whiff of the offensive odor, they would flee back to the mountains. Like his apprentice, Puriwariwe took Ipina day and night. Tirelessly, he chanted for hours, coaxing the spirits into Shoroi's hut, begging the Hakuras to cut open the young man's chest. Some evenings, Arasue, Iramamoe, and others accompanied the old man in his chants. During the second week, in an uncertain, quivering voice, Sharoe joined in the singing. At first, he only sang the Hakura songs of the armadillo, tapir, jaguar, and other large animals, which were believed to be masculine spirits. They were the easiest to entice. Next, he sang the Hakura songs of plants and rocks. And last, he sang the songs of the female spirits, the spider, snake, and hummingbird. They were not only the most difficult to lure, but, because of their treacherous and jealous nature, were hard to control. Late one night, when most of the Shabono was asleep, I sat outside Atua's hut and watched the men chant. Sharoe was so weak, one of the men had to hold him up so Puriwariwe could dance around him. Sharoe, sing louder, the old man urged him. Sing as loud as the birds, as loud as the jaguars. Puriwariwe danced out of the Shabono into the forest. Sharoe, sing louder, he shouted. The Hakuras dwelling in all the corners of the world need to hear your song. 3 nights later, Sharoe's joyful cries echoed through the Shabono. Father, Father, the Hakuras are approaching. I can hear their humming and buzzing. They are dancing toward me. They are opening my chest, my head. They are coming through my fingers and my feet. Sharoe ran out of the hut. Squatting before the old man, he cried, Father, Father, help me, for they are coming through my eyes and nose. Puriwariwe helped Sharoe to his feet. They began to dance in the clearing, their thin, emaciated shadows spilling across the moonlit ground. Hours later, a despairing scream, the cry of a panic-stricken child, pierced the dawn. Father, Father, from today on, let no woman come near my hut. That's what they all say, Rotimi mumbled, getting out of her hammock. She stoked the fire, then buried several plantains under the hot embers. When Etua decided to be initiated as a Shapori, I had already gone to live with him, she said. The night he begged Puriwariwe to let no woman near him, I went to his hut and drove the Hakuras away. Why did you do that? Etua's mother urged me to do it, Rotimi said. She was afraid he would die. She knew Etua liked women too much. She knew he would never become a great Shapori. Rotimi sat in my hammock. I will tell you the whole story. She snuggled comfortably against me, then began to speak in a low whisper. The night the Hakuras entered Etua's chest, he cried out just as Sharoe did tonight. It is the female Hakuras who make such a fuss. They want no woman in the hut. Etua sobbed bitterly that night, crying out that an evil woman had passed near his hut. I felt quite sad when I heard him say that the Hakuras had left him. Did Etua know it was you who had been in his hut? No, Rotimi said. No one saw me. If Puriwariwe knew, he didn't say. He was aware Etua would never be a good Shapori. Why did he get initiated in the first place? There is always the possibility that a man may become a great Shapori. Ritimi rested her head against my arm. That night, many men stayed up chanting for the Hikuras to return. But the spirits had no desire to come back. They had left not only because Itua had been soiled by a woman, but because the Hikuras were afraid he would never be a good father to them. Why does a man get soiled when he goes with a woman? Shapori do, Ritimi said. I don't know why, because men as well as Shapori enjoy it. I believe it's the female Hikuras who are jealous and afraid of a man who enjoys women too often. Ritimi went on to explain how a sexually active man had little desire to take a pina and chant to the spirits. Male spirits, she explained, were not possessive. They were content if a man took the hallucinogenic snuff before and after a hunt or a raid. I'd rather have a good hunter and warrior than a good Shapori for a husband, she confessed. Shapori don't like women much. What about Iramamoe? I asked. He is considered a great Shapori, yet he has 2 wives. Oh, you are so ignorant. I have to explain everything to you, Ritimi giggled. Iramamoe does not sleep with his 2 wives often. His youngest brother, who has no woman of his own, sleeps with one of them. Ritimi looked around to make sure no one was overhearing us. Have you noticed that Iramamoe often goes into the forest by himself? I nodded. But so do other men. And so do women. Ritimi aped me, mispronouncing the words the way I had. I had great difficulty imitating the proper Itikoteri nasal tone, which probably was a result of their usually having tobacco wads in their mouth. That's not what I mean, she said. Iramamoe goes into the forest to find what great Shapori seek. What is that? The strength to travel to the House of Thunder. The strength to travel to the sun and come back alive. I've seen Iramamoe sleep in the forest with a woman, I confessed. Ritimi laughed softly. I will tell you a very important secret, she whispered. Iramamoe sleeps with a woman the way a Shapori does. He takes a woman's energy away, but gives nothing in return. Have you slept with him? Ritimi nodded. But no matter how much I coaxed and pleaded with her, she would not elaborate any further. A week later, Sharoi's mother, sisters, aunts, and cousins started to wail in their huts. Old man, the mother cried, my son has no more strength. Do you want to kill him of a hunger? Do you want to kill him from lack of sleep? It is time you left him alone. The old Shapori paid no attention to their cries. The following evening, Iramamoe took a pina and danced in front of his son's hut. He alternated between jumping high in the air and crawling on all fours, imitating the fierce growls of a jaguar. He stopped abruptly. With his eyes fixed on some point directly in front of him, he sat on the ground. Women, women, do not despair, he cried out in a loud, nasal voice. For a few more days, Shiroi has to remain without food. Even though he appears weak and his movements are clumsy, and he moans in his sleep, he will not die. Standing up, Iramamoe walked toward Puriwariwe and asked him to blow more apina into his head. Then he returned to the same spot where he had been sitting. Listen carefully, Rutimi urged me. Iramamome is one of the few Shapori who has traveled to the sun during his initiation. He has guided others on their first journey. He has two voices. The one you just heard was his own. The other one is that of his personal Hekura. Now Iramamoe's words sprang from deep in his chest, like stones rumbling down a ravine. The words tumbled into the silence of people gathered in their huts. Huddled together in an atmosphere heavy with smoke and anticipation, they seemed to be barely breathing. Their eyes glittered with longing for what the personal Hekura of Iramamoe had to say, for what was about to take place in the mysterious world of the initiate. My son has traveled into the depths of the earth and burned in the hot fires of their silent caves, said Iramamoe's rumbling Hekura voice. Guided by the Hekura eyes, he has been led through cobwebs of darkness, across rivers and mountains. They have taught him songs of birds, fishes, snakes, spiders, monkeys, and jaguars. Although his eyes and cheeks are sunken, he is strong. Those who have descended into the silent burning caves, those who have traveled beyond the forest mist, will return with their personal Hekura in their chest. Those are the ones who will be guided to the sun, to the luminous huts of my brothers and sisters, the Hekuras of the sky. Women, women, do not cry out his name. Let him go on his journey. Let him depart from his mother and sisters, so he can reach the world of light, which is more exhausting than the world of darkness. Spellbound, I listened to Iramamoe's voice. No one talked. No one moved. No one looked anywhere but at his figure, sitting rigidly in front of his son's hut. After every pause, his voice rose to a higher pitch of intensity. Women, women, do not despair. On his path, he will meet those who have withstood the long nights of mist. He will meet those who have not turned back. He will meet those who have not trembled in fear by what they have witnessed during their journey. He will meet those who had their bodies burned and cut up, those who had their bones removed and dried in the sun. He will meet those who did not fall into the clouds on their way to the sun. Women, women, do not disturb his balance. My son is about to reach the end of his journey. Do not watch his dark face. Do not look into his hollow eyes that shine with no light, for he is destined to be a solitary man. Iramamoe stood up. Together with Puriwariwe, he entered Sharowi's hut, where they spent the rest of the night chanting softly to the Hekuras. A few days later, the youth who had taken care of Sharowi during his long weeks of initiation washed him with warm water and dried him with fragrant leaves. Then he painted his body with a mixture of coals and onoto, wavy lines extending from his forehead down his cheeks and shoulders. The rest of his body was marked with evenly distributed round spots that reached to his ankles. For a moment, Sharowe stood in the middle of the clearing. His eyes shone sadly from their hollow sockets, filled with an immense melancholy, as if he had just realized he was no longer his former human self, but only a shadow. Yet there was an aura of strength about him that had not been there before, as if the conviction of his newfound knowledge and experience were more enduring than the memory of his past. Silently, Puri Rauriwe led him into the forest.